Hello and welcome to a kind of video I used to do back in the past, some videos about history and not so much about games. You are going to see some gameplay back there, but for the most part this is going to be about, well, what you see in the title. 10 historically relevant and interesting facts about submarines that probably you didn't know. If you like this kind of videos, it's really important for me that you press that like button and that if you have anything to say it so in the comment section below, because I want to know if there's interest to see more of these videos in the future or that this is going to be a one-off. It depends on you guys. If you like this, just let me know. Again, press the like button or comment with anything you have on your mind down below. So, without further ado, let's go to the first interesting fact about submarines and U-boats in World War II. Number 1. Diving depths. German submarines were well known for how deep they were able to dive. Now, common types as the Type 7 or the Type 9 were rated for a test depth between 200 and 220 meters. That means up to 720 feet, more or less. If you are to make a comparison, the deepest diving American fleet submarine of World War II was the Thames class. It was rated for 120 meters, 400 feet. Now, that's a very big difference, but it's even more surprising than you think when you consider real-life facts. If you have seen the movie Dashboard, and if you haven't, I can't recommend it highly enough, you'll remember a sequence where the submarine goes well past its maximum depth, only to keep on going, down and down until it hits the bottom. You might think that, well, the movie makes wanted to make a drama that create tension, that such a thing was impossible. It turns out that, well, it was quite possible. And there's one really impressive instance of it. On the 30th of January 1943, U-175 off the west coast of Africa was subjected to a pounding from aircraft with depth charges. She was so badly damaged that her crew was unable to recover control and forced the submarine to stop diving at 310 meters. That's more than 1,000 feet. That's quite amazing. U-175 was able to surface, dive again because she was subjected to attack just as she surfaced, stay there for a while, surface again, and enable enough repairs and cut down the leaks enough to do a full return to base, where she arrived on the 24th of February 1943. Number 2. U-boat propulsion. Linking with the previous fact, U-175 had a disabled diesel. She had to return to base with just one diesel operational, but she still came back to base with both propellers running. Now, there's a wide acceptance on the idea that when a U-boat lost a diesel, it would run on one shaft only, but that was not the case. How could this be? Well, in the screen you have the engineering graph the US did on U-505. The key parts of that graph are the diesel engine, the electric motor, the propeller, and the clutches in between. Now, on normal operation, the diesel would be turning the electric motor and turning the shaft and screw. Now, you could run the electric motor as a generator to charge batteries or in propulsion mode to help the diesel in propulsion with the U-boat. To use the electric motor, you would unclutch the diesel and shut it down, keeping the electric motor in propulsion mode and the shaft turning only using electrical power. Now, if you lost one diesel, you could decouple it and run the shaft with just the electric motor. Of course, that would cost electricity, which came from the batteries. Meanwhile, you'd be able to run the shaft on the other diesel with the electric motor on that side generator mode. That way you would compensate for the electricity used on the other shaft electric motor. German propulsion systems on the most common submarines, the Type 7 and the Type 9, were highly reliable, were very flexible, and they were able to sustain a shit ton of battle damage and still keep on running. Number 3. Torpedo external storage. U-boats depended on several factors to stay in operational areas. Range being one of them, supplies for the crew another. and, of course, torpedo load. A submarine without torpedoes was of not great use after all. So, in order to extend the operational time of U-boats, the internal storage of torpedoes was complemented with external storage. Torpedoes were stored in canisters out of the pressure hull, but below the deck structure of the submarine. Type 7s carried one such canister forward, one aft. Type 9s carried 5, 2 forward, 3 aft. To reload a torpedo tube with a torpedo from one of the above the canisters, the submarine would have to surface. Then the torpedo would be pulled with winches and then lowered into the torpedo room. These torpedoes were 7 meters long, roughly 24 feet, 21 inches in diameter, and weighed more than a ton. They were extremely difficult to manhandle and, as mentioned, required special equipment such as winches to lift the torpedo from its canister and guide it into the torpedo loading hatch. This process could take hours for just one torpedo. It demanded the submarine to stay on the surface all that time. It couldn't dive at all. The operation demanded very calm seas, and it was obviously a high-risk proposition, as it couldn't dive at all for the length of the process. As such, it's hardly surprising that the whole thing wasn't commonly done, and that from the middle of the war, when surface U-boats were under constant pressure and threat, the external storage stopped being used at all. U-boats would sail out in patrol with those storage empty. Number 4. Kites on a submarine. There's a lot of examples of aircraft being used on submarines before and during World War II. During mid-war, submarines with tiny biplane floatplanes stored on watertight hangars were a thing. The floatplanes were to be assembled on the surface and launched, be it through a catapult, be it through putting it on the sea and let it fly off. You can guess the feasibility of the idea. It demanded a big submarine to begin with, a pretty large structure up top that did nothing for the sub's underwater speed, a long assembly process on the surface that demanded the submarine to stay on the surface, it couldn't dive, and then the same, but when the floatplane came back, because you had to disassemble it and store it again. And all that, not to mention the gasoline storage for the plane, the cruise pods for the pilots, the mechanics, all that jazz. Unsurprisingly, most nations deemed the experiment as not worth it. The Japanese, however, went full ahead with the concept in their Type B-1 submarine, also known as I-15 class. An absolute monster of a submarine for its time, displacing almost 4,000 tons underwater, it carried a Yokosuka E-14Y on a watertight hangar and had a catapult to launch it. As for its operational success, or rather lack thereof, let's say that it was not really great. Now, the Germans were a totally different route. They went with kites. Kites, you'll ask? Well, more precisely, rotor kites, a very small autogyro. It was called, and I'm going to observe this, the Fokker HLS 330, or FA 330. The craft could be deployed to the deck on a submarine and was held by a 150-meter cable. The airflow on the rotors, caused by the U-boat's speed, would spin them up. When deployed, this craft could reach around 120 meters above the surface and allow the pilot a vision of around 25 nautical miles around him. A huge increase over the normal 5 or so nautical miles you could see from the conning tower of a surface U-boat. More so, if, in an emergency, the submarine had to go under, well, the cable just could cut, and then the submarine could dive with no danger for itself. Of course, that scenario would kind of suck for the rotor kite pilot, but well, at least he'd have a very soft way down the surface of the water. Now then, surviving there was a different matter, but he could still be rescued, hypothetically. When not in use, the craft was stowed in 2 watertight compartments of the conning tower. In calm weather, the assembly and disassembly of the craft could be completed in less than 5 minutes. This sounds like a truly useful piece of equipment, and indeed, it would have been, at least in the early years of the Battle of the Atlantic. However, this craft was only deployed from 1943 onwards, and at that stage of the war, a submarine going around happily flying a kite around the place was, it wasn't a go. It was used on much less danger-intensive theaters, however, such as the Indian Ocean and the South Atlantic, but in very limited number. That we know, only 3 U-boats used it: U-177, U-181, and U-852. All of them of the very large, for German standards, Type 9D2. Number 5. Sunk by a toilet. Now there's the story of at least one German submarine that sank when one of the sailors went to the bathroom, did his thing, and then tried flushing it, only to discover to his horror that the sea and everything that he had put on the toilet just minutes before came rushing into the submarine and sank it. Well, as funny, as stinky this story may be, it's not true. What it is true, however, is that the malfunction of a toilet did factor heavily in the loss of one submarine. U-1206, to be more precise. The 14th of April 1945, sailed at a depth of maybe 200 feet, a few miles off Scotland. Well, at that point, the commander decided to use the toilet, and something clearly went wrong. We don't know exactly how it happened, but a valve that should have stayed shut was opened and resulted in a good amount of seawater entering the boat. Now, the inrush of water alone wasn't that large as to put the boat's survivability at risk, but the problem was different. See, the head, the toilet, was directly above a set of batteries, and when water mixes with batteries, it ends up in the production of something really nasty, chlorine gas. Chlorine gas, as you probably will know, is awfully dangerous and poisonous, so the boat was forced to surface almost immediately. Now, as if the chain of events wasn't unfortunate enough, the submarine happened to surface right below an enemy aircraft. Now, the crew was able to clear the gas by blowing clean air into the boat, saving themselves from dying a horrible death, but in the meantime, they were put in the position that were going to be bombed by an aircraft. And so it happened. The resulting damage leaving U-1206 unable to dive. Now, considering the hopeless situation that his untimely visit to the head had put themselves in, the commander had no choice but to order an abandoned ship. 46 sailors survived, including the commandant, but 4 crewmen were lost. Now, yeah, that means that sadly or happily or whatever, at any rate, no U-boat was sunk by a toilet. At least not on its own. Number 6. U-boats in Ireland. A story began circulating around 1996 that U-boats in need of refueling made stops in Ireland to top off their tanks. Well, this is not the case. It's been something that's been proven as false. But something that's still not that widely known, at least not in its full scale, is that U-boats did indeed refuel in a neutral nation. Well, not really. More on that later. But it's known for a fact that, with detailing from the submarines and ships involved, that in several occasions U-boat did refuel in Spain. I don't know, I'm Spanish after all. Spain wasn't at war, but wasn't exactly neutral. In a rush of inspiration very much usual in him, Generalissimo Franco decided to stay out of the war, but as non-belligerent. Now that just means that you are not militarily involved in a war, but you are free to assist or not assist aside on an ongoing war. Franco really outdid himself on that one. He was very known for playing several sides at the same time, but this one really outdid himself, because he actually did assist both sides at the same time. Initially, until 1943 or so, he mostly helped the Axis side, but as the tide of war turned, so did the support of the Franquist regime from one side to the other. Or rather, the Allies were more and more supported as the war went on, while Spain was also helping Germany at the same time until the very end of the war. Now, talk about playing with those two hands at the same time. At any rate, yes. A lot of people know that German submarines were resupplying at Vigo during World War II. What is not as known is that other ports were involved as well. El Ferrol, Cádiz, and Las Palmas also saw U-boat supply visits during World War II. German transport would sail and intern themselves there, full to the brim with spare parts, food, fuel oil, even torpedoes. U-boats would come at night, surface beside the intern ship, resupply, and then get going before daytime. This thing went on since 1940 until 1944. It was well known by the British at least since 1941, but their protest made no effect. Around 25 U-boats were resupplied that way. U-boat Blimp Duel. During 1942, German U-boats ran rampart up and down the US East Coast, racking tonnage in the thousands. The US was caught totally unprepared to fight this offensive, called Operation Drumbeat, also labeled by the Germans as the Second Happy Time. As time went on, however, US anti-submarine assets grew and the going got more and more tough for the Germans. Merchant ships stopped sailing alone and convoys were established. Escorts grew in number and more aircraft were devoted to the task of finding and attacking German submarines venturing too close to US waters. And by aircraft, I don't mean just planes. In 1939, the US Navy developed the K-craft airship, a blimp. That would become a very common sight during World War II. K-craft blimps were used in anti-submarine patrols and provided important cover from Allied shipping at a time that escort ships were scarce to say the least. Those blimps were eventually equipped with radar and with time, even magnetic anomaly detectors, commonly known as MAD. It was manned by 10 crewmen. The K-ships were slow, as blimps usually are, but very well armed for the task. Up to 4 depth charges on board internal base and external mounts could be carried, and, of course, being American after all, an M2 50 cal machine gun was mounted on the bow of the crew pod. They were able to stay aloft for more than 24 hours in a row, so slow as they might have been, they could be up for extended periods of time, something obviously very useful in the anti-submarine war. On the night of July the 18th, 1943, the US Navy blimp K-74, tasked with convoy escort duties over the Florida Straits. Eventually, the blimp's radar located a German submarine running on the surface, and heading directly towards the convoy K-74 was intended to escort. Blimps weren't supposed to attack surface U-boats, as they were easy targets for the submarine's AA shoot. But with the U-boat heading directly for the tanker, K-74 wasted no time and pressed on to attack. The blimp threw everything they could at the submarine, and by everything I mean like everything. Depth charges, of course, were dropped. The 50 cal was, of course, fired. But probably judging that said firepower wasn't living up to Americans' reputation and standards, the crew also fired at the hapless submarine with a Thompson submachine gun and the 1911 sidearms. Yeah, they really fired everything they had. During the attack, K-74 was badly hit by 20mm anti-aircraft fire from the submarine, but the U-boat, that turned out to be U-134, didn't get away without damage herself. Depth charges have damaged her underwater, and the 50 cal also caused quite some damage to the casing. The tanker the submarine was approaching managed to escape, so the effort was worth it. K-74, however, did not survive. Severely damaged, the crew lost control of her and slowly fell to the sea, tail first, where she remained afloat. The crew immediately abandoned ship, fearing the wreck would sink and maybe set off the remaining depth charges aboard. But surprisingly enough, it remained afloat for several hours, enough in fact that U-134 was able to approach the wreck, inspect it, and even make photos of it. The crew was rescued the next day, all but one, who fell victim to a shark attack. So you could say that the score was 1-0, U-boat won the encounter. Yet U-134 had been damaged enough to call her patrol quits. She turned around and sailed home, only to be sunk the 27th of August 1943 by HMS Rother. She was lost with all hands. So all in all, in the end, I would say it was more of a tie. U-boats going to Argentina. U-boats that survived the war had very different destinies and fates. Some were transferred to the victors, others were scuttled, but one in particular had a very unique adventure ahead of her. U-977 was a Type 7C U-boat that had just sailed off Norway and was sailing toward her intended patrol area when the surrender of Germany was announced. When the news were received, the majority of the crew decided to make for Argentina. Well, I guess that living in a prosperous, by then, South American country was a much better prospect than returning to Germany, being captured, POW, and then have to deal with the fact that Germany was destroyed. Those who didn't want to do the trip were offloaded at Norway, where they surrendered to the British. The rest embarked in a truly remarkable trip to reach South America. Of course, with the war ended, detection would mean pretty much game over for the crew, so they chose to not run on the surface. U-977 dived and then used the Schnorkel for most of the trip. Now that was quite the feat at the time. Snorkels allowed a submarine to use diesel engines, but didn't allow for very high speeds. Anything over 5 knots and the snorkel pole could be ripped off. And 5 knots is not a very big speed for a trip such as Norway to Argentina. Not only that, U-boats, other than electroboats, weren't designed to spend very large periods of time underwater. In a normal submarine, crew accommodation was tolerable because crewmen could go up and breathe some fresh air now and then when the submarine was on the surface. But with the submarine snorkeling, it was not a choice. Waste in particular couldn't be disposed of while dived, so as time went by, more and more, let's be straightforward here, shit piled up within the submarine. If that list of amazing features of the cruise weren't enough, the fear and danger of being detected and immediately sunk, of course, weighed hard on the crew. U-977 dived on May the 10th, 1949, only to surface the 14th of July. 66 days in a row. Can only imagine the kind of smell. Or rather, better not imagine it at all. The submarine did a brief stop at the Cabo Verde Islands to have a swim break and hopefully throw away all the accumulated garbage. Then resume course. They arrived to Mar del Plata, Argentina, the 17th of August after a trip that lasted a staggering 108 days. There's a book about it, U-Boat 977 by Heinz Schaffer. And by the way, I probably butchered that name, but whatever. U-977 was surrendered to the Argentinians, who later transferred it to the Americans. And the Americans then sank the submarine in a torpedo test in 1946. By the way, this is the supposed U-boat that carried Hitler to Argentina. Well, if that was the case, he must have enjoyed such a joyful trip, particularly so the smell. Just kidding, Hayden was not aboard, but revisionist theories say he was. So I'll leave it to you to believe if he was there or not. Number 9. Schnorkel, that great German invention. No. When the war began, U-boats were at their strongest because they remained mostly at the surface. They attacked mostly at night when they couldn't be easily seen and they could exploit to the top their speed and maneuverability to infiltrate convoys and attack them from the inside. But as war went on, and in particular after radar became commonplace for the Allies, they were forced more and more time to go underwater. And underwater they were much more vulnerable and could be tracked with a stick. And then more and more aircraft and aircraft with radar made the life of a surface U-boat very hard indeed. German submarines were forced underwater more and more and were able to stay on the surface less and less, which was quite a problem. But then, of course, Germany introduced the Schnorkel, which allowed U-boats to travel underwater as much as they wanted. Right? Well, as we did see before, that was not exactly true, because an U-boat using Schnorkel wasn't just as slow as molasses. It was also blind and deaf. Periscope sighting ranges were extremely limited, and the deafening noise of the diesels meant hydrophones were useless. Then there was the waste disposal problem. You had to throw the garbage somewhere, and while dived you couldn't do it. The Schnorkel used on anything but a quite calm sea was problematic because the Schnorkel could be swamped by waves. Well, that wasn't a true problem for the diesels, as there was an automatic cut-off valve that stopped the ingress of water into the engines in case the Schnorkel head went underwater, so the engines wouldn't be damaged by the water. But when that happened, the diesels would still be running. That means sucking air, a lot of air. And that air came from inside the submarine, which would cause an instantaneous drop of air pressure within the pressure hull. Of course, that doesn't mean that there'd suddenly be no air to breathe. Far from it. Engines didn't suck that much air. And they could also be easily switched off. The problem came that the sudden drop in pressure was more than enough to cause quite severe pain due to sudden pressure changes. It was really, really uncomfortable, to say the least. Not as much as to be dangerous to the crew life, but yeah, it was painful, it was uncomfortable, and it was a pain in the ass. Still, the Schnorkel was a valuable piece of kit for the Germans at the time it was introduced, already in 1944. It at least gave a chance to the submarines to reach the operational area without being utterly destroyed by air attacks on the Bay of Biscay or on the North Sea. The Electro-Boots, the Type 21 and the Type 23, were designed with an integral snorkel that allowed for much better speeds and solved quite a number of the associated problems with the item. So, go German tech, right? No, not either. The snorkel wasn't a German invention, it was a Dutch one. Germany, as you probably know, invaded the Netherlands in 1940 and captured some submarines, and some of those submarines had a snorkel. And initially, the Germans thought so little of it that the Dutch submarines that had a snorkel fit had it removed. The Germans saw no use in using diesels underwater. Of course, later on, when war wasn't going well, they came back to it and thought, maybe it was not that bad of an idea after all. So yeah, it wasn't that great of an item until it was properly developed and fit into submarines intended to use it as a default, as designed, not as an afterthought, as it was the case in the Type 7s and Type 9s. But most of it is not that it was immature, it's not that it wasn't really that great, it's that it was in German. Number 10. U-537 invades North America. The Germans had some strange uses for its submarines in World War II, but probably the most unusual was a weather outpost they built in the Arctic Circle, in what turned out to be the only German invasion of the North American territory of World War II. Well, maybe invasion is too much, but for sure, armed German troops set foot on North American soil, at least for a while. During the Battle of the Atlantic, weather forecasts were always better for the Allies, for a simple reason: they had weather outposts on both sides of the Atlantic. Germany, meanwhile, could only get reports from the bases in Europe and from boats in operational areas. As a result, the Allies were much better in predicting the weather for the naval operations in the Atlantic, while the Germans were, for the most of time, blind. So Germany decided to set up an automatic weather outpost on their own, as far as west as they could. This weather station was to be transported by U-537, which was outfitted to be able to install the equipment on the northern shore of Labrador at Martin Bay. The station consisted of measuring instruments, a 150-watt Lorentz transmitter, and 10 canisters with nickel-cadmium and dry cell high-voltage batteries. It was designed to measure the weather and automatically radio reports at established times. The submarine left Kiel the 18th of September 1943 and went through quite a trip to get it done. The submarine, however, was able to reach there a month later and was able to set up the weather station. The Germans disguised the setup as much as possible, so it would seem like it was an allied station. On the way back to the port in occupied France, U-537 was attacked 3 times by Canadian planes, but she managed to escape. Quite the trip. The weather station was kept secret to the Allies. In fact, it was only discovered almost by accident by Canadian authorities in 1981. The good news for the Germans were brief, however. After a few days of useful radio reports from the automated station, they found the frequency was being jammed. We had no idea of why or how, for the Allies certainly had no idea of what was going on. There was a second try in July 1944. U-867 set sail from Norway with the needed equipment to set another station, but she was sunk on her trip. So there you go. 10 interesting facts about submarines and U-boats in World War II that maybe you didn't know. If you did know none of them, well, great. If you did know some of them, well, also great. At any rate, if you like this video, really I need to know. So let me know in the comment section below or through thumbs up in the video. These kind of videos takes a lot, and I mean it, a lot of work and a lot of time in preparing, get it set up, Also, it's not the easiest thing for me, as you might know, English is not my first language, and I really have to do an effort to edit the video so it's not a complete mess. Anyway, this is it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and see you later.